Hi, you're listening to She Shield, your one-stop pod for all topics personal safety. I'm your host, Sofia, and my goal is to help educate women and men on concealed carry, martial arts, and all topics self-defense. Before we start today, please take a moment to rate the podcast. This is how we get our name out there. So if you don't mind, I know on Spotify, it's those 5 stars at the top. All you have to do is click on that and give it your honest feedback. And if this is your first episode, welcome. This is a perfect place to start. This episode is sponsored by Big Tex Ordnance, your soon-to-be favorite retailer for all of your firearms needs. BTO believes in only selling high-quality gear to responsibly armed citizens, as well as providing pre- and post-sale support. BTO values firearms training and supports firearms instructors nationwide. They even pay for their own staff to train with high-level instructors to ensure that when you reach out as the consumer, you are taken care of. Today we have Melody Lauer on the show. This is long overdue. There are so many topics that Melody just shines in. So I'm so excited for you to be here, Melody, and I would love for you to introduce yourself to the listeners.
Well, first, thank you so much for having me on. I've heard so much about you over the last, I think it's been over a year now that I've been hearing about you. So thank you so much for inviting me. My name is Melody Lauer. I am the owner of Citizens Defense Research. I've been with Citizens Defense Research now for, 2016 was when we started. And we have several offerings that we offer, but one of them is the Armed Parent, which is the thing that you want to talk about today.
Absolutely.
And I guess I could introduce myself more than that, but I started in the industry way back in like 2006, I believe, was when I really started getting into this, and started instructing really seriously and heavily about 2013, 2014. That's when I decided to stop being a consumer and to start putting out information largely around the kids and gun aspect, because that's when I started having children of my own and really started asking questions that I realized there weren't a lot of answers to. So started taking more and more training and trying to test that, incorporate that into my own kind of lexicon of knowledge, and then seeing how it fit, and then working with others to try and put that out into a coherent class that people could take for this issue. But that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. I was about to say, please introduce yourself. And then there was like a lag. So I'm glad you read my mind. Perfect. Yes. This is the coolest little job ever, getting to sit down with individuals like you to hear your background and how everything came together into what you do today. And I meant to say this in the beginning, I've had the honor of training with you at the Taurus Range Day experience. Try to say that correctly. And I was telling you before the show, the way that you ran your class has just like completely changed the way I see safety briefings, communication on the range, and also just overall technique and what to emphasize when people are new, and also how to balance such a wide variety of individuals and like their backgrounds with firearms. So thank you so much for that. That was incredible. I already wanted you on the podcast before that, but after that I was like, now I want it even more. So thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate that. And I was very, very glad to, be able to meet you there, because I, again, had heard so much about you, but then to have that feedback is really valuable, because, it's really awesome to get feedback from people who've been to multiple classes versus someone who's like, oh, this is my first class. It's great. Well, of course you think it's great. It's your first one. So thank you for that feedback.
Absolutely. I do wish, though, on that note, that it had been my first class. And I think I said that to you at some point, because seriously, the way that, would you attribute it to Citizen Defense Research, or would you say that it's specifically the way you run classes, the safety standards?
Well, the safety standards are the safety standards for Citizens Defense Research. That is, our safety brief is the universal safety briefs that we expect each of our instructors to use. That is part of the experience of coming to a Citizens Defense Research, is that high standard of safety. As far as like where that came from just my own experiences throughout the years, and other instructors as well who've worked with me, and kind of like the ways that we've seen either it go wrong or potentially go wrong, and then just seeing how best to set people up for success. And if you front load all of that and you tell them what they need, what they can expect, all that kind of stuff, people rise to the level of your expectations all the time, but you have to prepare them. And we've had very little issues. And I think one of the reasons we've had such little issues is because we have a very thorough safety brief. We have very thorough expectations that we communicate very clearly. And then we hold people accountable to that standard. And that's how it goes. And we've had very little issues because of that. And we want to keep that standard really high because we don't ever want anybody. We've been accused, CDR has been accused multiple times of being too safety conscious. And I'm like, you know what? I will wear that as a badge of honor because I would much rather have someone come away from a class going, wow, that was too much safety than ever have anybody go away going, I felt unsafe in that class. Because, and this is something that I've talked about for years, I think that for a while we spent so much time trying to convince people that firearms were safe when they're not. I mean, it's an inherently dangerous activity. And if you acknowledge that as instructors, no, this is an inherently dangerous activity that we are going to all take part. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. And that doesn't mean that we can't do it well, but that means that we're all going to have to be vigilant about what we're doing here. And we're all going to be on the same page about what we're expecting from one another. And if you can do that, you can have a great, fun time that everyone comes away from having learned a lot without feeling, like they were at all in danger. And for people who don't know any better, the people, this is their brand new first class, they might be coming from a background where, they have no idea what is safe and what isn't. And you owe it to them to set the standard for them. Because if later on they go to another class where people can handle guns wherever they want to, or, there's nobody's watching their muzzle, things like that, that sets that standard. And they might go to another class and they could hurt themselves or hurt somebody else because that standard was not set for them at the very beginning. So, and we get a lot of first-time students. We get a ton of first-time students. So I feel a really big responsibility to make sure I set the standard really high for them.
Absolutely. The first time I heard of your class was by Tessa Booth. She was like, if you don't do anything else, take a CDR class. It will completely change your perspective. And I trust everything Tessa says, but I didn't take that as seriously as I should have because it did take me, getting invited to the Taurus event to train with you all. And I was like kicking myself the whole time. I was like trying to be present, right? But I was also kicking myself and I was like, why didn't I do this sooner? And for anyone who hasn't experienced a lack of safety standard, what you said is completely right. I remember my second USPSA match, there was a dude, and now knowing what I know, I would have spoken up sooner, but he muzzled Lisa and I, and it was cool to have someone there to be like, yeah, that just happened, right? Because, I gaslight myself a lot, at least, when I'm like, maybe it wasn't that bad. But Lisa was like, nope, we definitely just looked down the muzzle together, BFFs looking down a muzzle. And it happened 3 times total, and it wasn't until the third time, last stage, this gentleman got DQ'd. Found out later, this is crazy, he's on the board of this particular state's USPSA committee. I don't know what to call it. That blew my mind. And that was way later. He argued with the RO, of course, got DQ'd. And at that point, Lisa had to pull me back because I was going to march over there and be like, yes, I did look down your muzzle. And but the whole time I was competing, I was not with it. Like, I was like almost shaking, because dude was unloading. Like, you never know what happens in that process. And actually, that was one of the times. Another time he was running and gunning. So I couldn't see his finger. I don't know if it was off the trigger. All I could see was his muzzle at that point. And then you get very hyper fixated and it ruined that experience. So to have someone like you perpetuating that in the industry, I already feel safer. And I feel good about having someone to send, a place to send newbies, especially to. Before we move on, I'd love to know, what are all the classes you offer? Where are you typically teaching? Where can people find you?
Sure. So our kind of our flagship class is the Armed Parent. That's kind of what we're known for. We teach nationally, so pretty much where people host us is where we go. There's not a place that we would not go, provided we're able to legally teach there, of course. So the arm parrot is a big one. Chris teaches his home defense class. He also teaches his mental agility and preparedness planning skills class that he calls MAPS, which is fantastic. No shooting in that one too. So if you just want to take it as a, kind of a mental agility sort of dust up, you don't have to worry about, additional ammo, all that kind of stuff. Caleb teaches his revolver class, which has been really popular. People have really, each time he doesn't do it very often because he's got so many other, I'm smacking my my microphone there because he's got other things, but he's wanting to actually do that a little bit more as well. I'm trying to think of all of the classes that we offer. We're rolling out a fundamental applied pistol skills 2. So I teach fundamental applied pistol skills 1, which is basically like your intro to self-defense firearms. We're rolling out a number 2 that Chris is going to be teaching. And then we're also rolling out, so we've got some things that are coming up. Alex, or K.A. Clark, as he is known online, is also going to be doing our whiz bang shooting class. So we've got a bunch of things that are coming up. We've got a lot of things that are already on the books. So the other big one that we're really proud of is Chris's Force on Force class that he does, because there aren't a ton of people in the industry who are doing a lot of Force on Force, particularly not as I think well as it can be done. And so Chris has a ton of experience with Force on Force. It's not, I would like to think of it as like a pre kind of ECQC sort of a thing, whereas ECQC is a lot of like hands-on, solving that extreme close quarters problem. This one is a little bit more before you get to that, there's not that contact. And so really, really excited about that one. So we just got a ton of options. You'll have to look at our website and see what's available.
Exactly. And I will, of course, link your website, all your socials, all the people you just mentioned in the show notes. So if you're listening right now, I always say this at the end of the episode, and then I'm like, why didn't I say this in the beginning? If you're listening and you want to pull up their page and do some light cyber stalking while you listen to this episode, this is your opportunity to kind of do that. And yes, what you said in the beginning was true. I am very interested in all of that, but specifically the armed parent. And this came from, recommendations, but just listening to you, we had a dinner, of course, the night before the Taurus event. And I know Tessa and I were both exhausted from the flight, but, once we got some food, I came alive and I got to hear, kind of your origin story. And I remember thinking like, I wish I was recording this right now, but, cause I want to hear it. So, if you don't mind, would you be willing to retell kind of what you told me at dinner, how you got into this, and, just seeing you talk about this, you light up, and it's just an honor to be able to be part of it and hear it. So anyway.
Sure. So the origin story of this is I've told it before, and it's kind of like one of those things where it sort of accidentally happened. I was working at a gun store, because really I just wanted to carry a gun for myself, and it wasn't even really my idea to start out with. My husband had approached me at one point in time and said, hey, he was traveling a lot. He's like, hey, do you want to get your permit to carry? Cause we had firearms in the house for home defense, but he's like, hey, I would feel more comfortable if you have your permit to carry. And I was like, okay. And I told him that I would only get my permit to carry under certain conditions. And one of them being that I needed professional training, one that I, got to choose my own gun, one that I got continued education, and the other one being that I needed to be allowed to practice on a regular basis, because I didn't think that just having a gun was sufficient, right? I wanted to know that I was proficient with it. And he was like, that sounds fine for me. So I went out and got some really good training with Insights Training Center, I believe is their full name, and with Greg Hamilton. fantastic first class to take. I also started going every week. There was a local range that had a women shoot free on Thursdays. So every Thursday I would go and I would practice. And after a while, they offered me a job. And at that time, I was like, I don't know anything about guns. Like this, I'm just doing this, for my own education. They're like, that's totally okay. We'll teach you. And I was really lucky because at that point in time, I did not realize how badly that could have turned out for me, because we now know that most gun stores aren't actually up to speed on a lot of things. But I got really lucky because these were actually some very, very well-trained and educated people who set me on a good path. And so it could have easily gone another direction and it didn't. So I'm very glad for that. But I started helping out there, and unfortunately they would not allow me to help in the range unless I was a certified instructor myself. So I was like, okay, I'll go and get my certified, my instructor certification. And I did. And I was starting to help people out, but it wasn't until I got pregnant with my first child that I had my first child, that I really, really realized that my life and my training and everything was just going to get turned on its head. I remember coming home with my baby in the little baby carrier and putting him down in our living room and looking around our house, and there was guns taken apart on our kitchen table, and there were like shotguns leaned up against the wall, and there were all these things. And I was like, our life is going to have to change like this. But nobody had really prepared me for that. Real and genuine. And I know that sounds kind of funny, right? Because it's like, it's not their responsibility to prepare me for this. And I understand that. But at the same time, it was never really talked about, right? Like when you go to the classes, it's you and the target is the bad guy, and you learn how to address the bad guy. And there is no talk about who's with you, what you're hanging on to, what you might have to do. And I was like, I've got this kid with me now. How does this change things? I don't know. I'm not prepared for this. And I remember the very first time I used to carry a 1911. I was a huge 1911 person. So I went to the range after having my baby, and I was like, well, if I'm hanging on to my baby, I'm probably going to have to shoot one-handed. And I started shooting one-handed, and I realized that I cannot control a 45 with one hand the way that I could with two hands. And that was the biggest thing that made me go, I might have to switch guns. And I did. I switched to a Glock 19, and I pretty much never went back. But that was just the tip of the iceberg of the things that I started to discover. So that was my first experience where I'm like, this is not the same. My second big kind of aha was Greg Ellifritz. If you don't know him, or if your listeners don't know him, please search him out. Greg Ellifritz wrote an article on his website about a force-on-force that they had conducted, where they had hired I think it was a little boy, like a 10-year-old little boy, to act as the child of the participants. And this was not an article to advocate for any kind of training or anything. It was just a reporting of the observations that they made in this force-on-force. And what they observed was that the participants who were playing the parent, often when the scenario started to escalate, they would collect the child and bring the child close to them. And that resulted in the child getting shot X amount of times. I don't remember exactly how many times it was, but it resulted in the child being shot many times. And the entire question that he was posing, it was not an answer, it was a question, is the parental instinct to collect your children to you helpful or harmful? It was just a question. And I was thinking a lot about that, because I felt that too as a young parent. I felt that desire and that instinct to, if there's anything that happens, I should collect my child to me. While I was thinking about that, the final kind of, I would say, nail in the coffin, but the final experience that I had that really woke me up to how little attention that we've put into this question was I went to one of Craig Douglas's experiential learning laboratories at the tactical conference put on by Rangemaster every year. And in this particular scenario, I won't give the fullest scenario because I know he rotates through his scenario sometimes. There was a child present, and I had this baby in my arms, and I ended up needing to shoot. And what ended up happening is I came out to full extension, and this baby ended up literally being cradled across both of my arms. And the term full ISO baby became a thing after that, because it was kind of funny.
That is really
And I
funny.
realized it was great. There's video of it, and I'm still just like, oh man, yeah, full ISO baby. And I was like, I'm not prepared for this. Like, I'm not prepared for the draw, anything having to do with fighting with a child in your arms. And after you go through his scenario, you can come back and watch other people do this scenario. And I came back and I watched, and I was amazed by how many times the baby got shot, the parents got shot, everybody got shot. And I was like, as a mom who has, at that point in time, now I had 2 little ones with me, I was still just like, how do we solve this problem? So that's when I really started to dive into it. I started to look into just carrying safely. At the time, I was in mom groups where people were talking about just safe carrying, and I was noticing that we have, as a industry, done an abysmal job, straight up an abysmal job at preparing parents to carry a firearm safely and secure around their children. We don't talk about it enough, and we are not preparing, especially people who want to incorporate like attachment style parenting into their journey. We have very little resources for them. And so at the time, this is something that was very kind of unique about my situation. I was also working at a parenting center while I was working at a gun store. So on one hand, I would spend the first half of my day at a parenting center teaching people about baby wearing and, attachment parenting and gentle parenting and breastfeeding classes and childbirthing classes and all these things. And then the other half of the day, I'd have to take off that hat, put on my gun store hat, and be like, do you want a 45 or a 9mm? And so I was in this very unique position to see both worlds and be deeply ingrained in both worlds at the same time. And I knew that when I had children, I was going to be an attachment style parent. I was going to co-sleep. I was going to baby wear. I was going to gentle parent. I was going to do all of those things. But how I was going to do that while being armed all the time was something. And when I started to talk about it, when I started to ask about it, overwhelmingly, the response that I got, surprisingly, was don't do it. Why would you do that? You shouldn't have a gun around your child. Don't carry your gun around your child. Why would you want to do that? That's negligent. And I'm like, these are from the pro-gun people. And of course, obviously going to the other side, I wasn't going to talk to the gentle parenting people about how do I do this safely with a gun? Because they're like, oh, are you crazy? You own a gun? Get rid of it. That's negligent. And so having to bridge both of these very important aspects of my life, I felt very alone in that. And, but I did start to have some success with like incorporating some things. But it really wasn't until there was a young woman, I believe it's in Washington State. Her husband had gotten her for Christmas a brand new concealed carry purse. And he was trying, by all accounts, when I looked into her after this incident, she had taken classes. She was trying her best to do it right. Her husband gave her this purse for Christmas. The day after Christmas, she took it out, went shopping with her mother and her 2-year-old son. Her son got access to her firearm in the shopping cart, in the bag, and shot and killed her. And this really affected me because I was the same age she was at the time, and my daughter was the same age as her child was at the time. And I had this distinct, but for the grace of God, there go I moment. And I was so upset. I called Kathy Jackson, and I was just like, ranting at her. I was just like, this should not happen. This is just ridiculous. There should be resources for people who want to carry guns safely around their children. There should be guides about how to do it safely instead of just don't do it. We give these very, platitude answers to a very complex question, and we don't supply enough resources for this. And so she started asking me questions in a very Kathy Jackson kind of way. And she was like, well, Melody, why do you think this wouldn't happen to you? And I was like, well, the reason it wouldn't happen to me is because I know what a good holster is. I know, I have very high standards for my holsters. I know, where I should have things. I know, when to use off-body carry and when not to use off-body carry. And I started listing all of these things. And, her response to me after this almost hour-long questionnaire was, Melody, if not you, then who? And I was like, ooh. And she's like, you've already answered all of these questions. She's like, and through trial and error and through good practices. And she's like, I think you're in the best place to actually, make a difference here. And so I made a class called Baby Wearing and Carrying and put that out. And I was so excited because it really was the first time I'd seen anything that amalgamation between the attachment style parenting that I love so much and carrying a gun with no judgment on either side. And so, the class, what I loved about it was I told people, hey, come bring your baby carriers, bring your holsters. We will have childcare on site. And if you want to breastfeed your baby, you can breastfeed your baby. It was the most welcoming environment I've ever seen for breastfeeding attachment parent style parents, their children and firearms in one place. And it was a huge success. We actually had to turn down people because we had too many kids for the daycare than we had participants. So that was fantastic. And it was the only firearms class I've ever been in where we did have breastfeeding moms. So I was so excited about that. And that's, that kind of got national attention. And that's when I joined up with John Johnson. He had me on Ballistic Radio. And he was like, hey, have you ever thought about making this into more than a one-day class, more geared towards like the tactics and techniques, more than just the safety? And I said, I would love to do that. I just don't have the resources. And then we teamed up and made it a genuine class. And the rest is history as far as the origin story.
So first of all, I know you've told me this, but hearing it again is still so overwhelming in a great way. Just thank you for what you're doing. My oldest sister just became a mom, and it's funny. I visited her, and my husband and I were going to a museum that didn't allow guns. They had a metal detector. And so I was like, I'm not gonna leave my gun in the car. It's down the road. I'll just leave it here. So I sat down with her and I'm like, look, I'm going to leave my gun unloaded. It's going to be in this safe. It's going to be here. And she's like, Sofia, my kid can't walk yet. You're fine. And I was like, no. It also has to do with communication with you too. And it got me thinking, like, what do I do when I visit her and her kid can walk around and I'm staying with her and like my gun is now like, it affects their family as well as just me. So I guess my question for you, following up all of that, besides just being in awe of you as always, is when is it time to take that class? Do you recommend people take it even if they're, even if they're just around children, or is it something you should just take once you become a parent? What would you say?
So interestingly enough, we've had a lot of people who aren't parents take the Armed Parent and are like, you should take this class even if you don't have kids, because even if you don't have children yourself, at some point in time, you are going to be around children. They make up a huge part of our population. Like nobody escapes not ever being around children. But we've also had other people who've taken it multiple times, like either when they were young, like young parents, and then come back and taken it later and been like, the amount of information that I was able to, one, absorb, and then two, I I was focused on this aspect of being, of the development of my child. And so I really kind of didn't pay attention to these other ones. But now that my child is no longer in this stage and now is in this stage, the class takes on an entirely different meaning to me, because now this part of the class is relevant to whereas this one was before. And we've had other people say, I want to come back and take this class at every stage of my child's development. Because we start from this is little baby in arms all the way up to this is an adult who's with you that you're taking responsibility for. They're not a fellow combatant. Like, they're not armed. They're not going to help you, but you are responsible for them. And that can be anybody, right? That could be a child. It could be an adult sized child, right? A 13-year-old, a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old can be adult sized, but still have the understanding of a child. And you're still going to take responsibility for them. You're still going to be helping them. But that could also be a friend who you're with. That could be a boyfriend or a girlfriend that you're with who just isn't into firearms. It could be a spouse. It could be anyone. And that's why we have the armed parent / guardian. It could be anybody that you're taking guardianship over in that moment. And that's why we include all of that. So the number of people who've come to the class and who are just like, this is a fantastic class, no matter who you are and where you are, because it takes into account the fact that it's not just me and the bad guy out there. Sometimes it can be, but most of the time when we're out and about with people we care about and people that we love and people we are going to take responsibility for. And we might as well learn how to incorporate them into our defense, or at least know what to do if they're in our presence. So that's kind of what that entire class is about.
Thank you. You articulate so well. It makes me think about the way I articulate everything. But anyway,
oh my gosh, because sometimes I'm like, am I saying that well?
Oh, yes, you are. It's absolutely getting across perfectly. So yes, thank you for sharing that. I definitely feel even more inclined now to take your class. I have students every now and then. I don't teach super often, but every time I've taught, if there's a mom in the class, they ask about concealment with a child. And we won't even be in a concealed carry class. We'll be in a basic pistol class. And I'm like, whoa, so that's actually way out of my lane. But here are some resources I have. I always point them to you, Kathy Jackson, and Tatiana Whitlock. Those three that's like my golden three. So, but I'm like, yeah, I don't have kids.
All good resources.
Right? Yes, exactly. All will be linked in the show notes per usual. But yes, so as far as how concealment adjusts as a child develops, I almost said grows, and I don't know. I guess both are appropriate here, but develops. How does that adjust?
Well, first, I think that a lot of people, and you kind of said it yourself, right? There are people who have this idea that just because my kid can't XYZ, therefore, they don't really have to think about safety. The problem with kids, well, it's not a problem. It's a great thing. It's just one of those things that we need to consider. Kids are problem-solving machines. That is good. That's how they are supposed to be. Everything is new to them and everything is an adventure to them. And we as adults tend to kind of forget that children are constantly developing. And if you aren't 3 steps ahead of them, you're already behind them. And so what a lot of times people will think is, well, my kid can't do XYZ, so therefore I don't have to prepare for XYZ. That is coming. Whatever it is that you don't feel like you need to prepare for right now, it's coming. So you might as well prepare for it now and be a step ahead of your child's development. And honestly, we get this golden period where our kids come and they are blobs and they can't do anything, but they're here. And so now is the time for us, well, they are blobs and they can do little more than drool and poop. Now is the time for us to be starting to think about the next stage of development, when they're rolling over, where they're crawling, where they're putting everything in their mouth. So that's when we need to start thinking about things like, hey, my kid puts everything in their mouth. So what am I bringing into the environment that might not be safe for them? Kids do get lead poisoning from the clothing that their parents wear to the range. and from handling and kissing and loving on your child before you have fully washed your body, your face, your hands. It has happened, and it will happen if people are not cognizant of the fact that, hey, you're covered in lead from being in the range. My rule when I came home is I don't wear my shoes. I don't wear my range shoes into the house. And I take a full and complete shower and put on clean clothes before I hug, kiss, snuggle, do anything with my kids. And that was just something my kids knew. When I'm coming back from any kind of range stuff, mommy loves you. Mwah, mwah, mwah. I'm going to go take a shower. I will be right back, and I will give you all the snuggles and hugs you want in the world. That was just the rule. And it kept my kids from ever having elevated lead levels. Next thing is, okay, yeah, your kid's a blob right now and your kid can't rack a slide or anything like that. But you also have to understand that kids don't handle or look at guns the way that you do. I did a test with all three of my children at different stages with a fake firearm. This firearm, it was a toy, but it had a slide that you could rack. And while it did not shoot any projectiles, it had an audible sound that it would make, like a gunshot sound, like a pew gunshot sound when you press the trigger. So I took this toy, and it was colored like a gun too. It did have the orange tip on it, but otherwise it looked like a gun. And I tested my children in different environments with this toy gun to see how they would manipulate a gun if they got no instruction whatsoever. And I was shocked at the way that my children learned how to manipulate this. My daughter would put it on her thigh and hold it and rack the slide that way. My youngest figured out how to pull the trigger with his toes. So we don't think of those things because we're adults and we understand how guns operate. But a child doesn't. A child will just take the thing and beat it and drool on it and smash it until something happens. And so you might see the gun on the table and say, my child isn't able to do whatever with it. Not the way it's supposed to be done. But I guarantee you, if you leave it long enough, they can figure out a way to manipulate it if they are determined to do so. And sometimes it'll just be by accident. So let's not even allow for that eventuality. Let's make sure that it is stored safely. Our rule in the household was if it is not on our person, physically attached to our body, it goes into a safe. Those are the only two places it could be. And the reason for that was because we never wanted our children to ever accidentally get access to a firearm that they should not have. And the best way to make sure that that happened was either to have physical control of it or for it to be locked in an appropriate safe. And guess what? Nobody can take a gun from you without you knowing it if it's strapped to your body. It just can't happen. As long as you're conscious and able to respond to that kind of thing. And if you're in that state where you probably shouldn't be having a gun on you. I'm just saying. So for instance, that made things like off-body carry not a thing that I would do around my children, because there would be times that a firearm would be in a bag and then that bag would be somewhere where I wasn't occasionally. So, off-body carry around kids was a no-go for me. So there are certain things that you have to be thinking at least one, if not 2 or 3 steps ahead of your kids. So my kids right now, my oldest is a teenager. He's 16. Right now, he's really interested in firearms, and that's fantastic. We'll take him to the range. We'll do things with him. But now is the time for me to start looking for things like, hey, is he in his first relationship? Is he, are him and his girlfriend fighting? Is he feeling kind of down about something that's going on? Is someone making him mad at school? I need to be thinking 3 steps ahead and think, okay, one, is he exhibiting and demonstrating enough responsibility where he should have access to firearms? And if not, or those conditions start to change, am I limiting access to firearms again? Just like anything, just like any kind of, responsible, like same with a car, right? He might get his driver's license, but there might be times where I'm like, hey, you know what? You're not showing me that you're responsible enough to have the keys for the car right now. So I'm going to take those away for you until you can kind of modulate yourself. Same thing with firearms and kids.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. This is also new to me, so I'm learning it as you are sharing it today. So with your own children and what you recommend overall, when do you start that conversation? And part of this is my lack of understanding of the developmental stages of children and when they can actually articulate and comprehend. So you'll have to remind me. My pre-med years are behind me. When do you recommend someone start that like verbal conversation?
Well, so I always say there was a gun present at the birth of each of our children. So our kids were introduced to things very, very quickly and very young. And that wasn't on purpose. Like we weren't like, we're going to make sure there's a gun there. It just, my husband happened to be carrying each time that, I gave birth. But we never thought that there was a too early time to start talking about it. So when they were, obviously blobs, there wasn't much conversing that was going on here, but I do remember, especially when my youngest was still breastfeeding, I'm talking less than 6 months old. I actually have a picture of me. It's one of my very favorite pictures. I'm breastfeeding him and he loved the texture of my grip. And so he would reach down with his hand while he was feeding and he would just feel the texture of my grip. And that was just something, and he got to the point where he would feel for it. Like that would be something he would feel for. And he would, and then I would know he was falling asleep when he stopped petting my gun. And, so I think about that sometimes. And I think there's never been a time in any of my kids' lives when a gun was not just there, right? And so there would be times when in those moments, maybe he would get a little handsy, which is why holster selection was so important to me. I don't care if you as an adult can't get your finger between the trigger guard and the trigger. Have you seen how small a child's hands are and seen how small their fingers are? There should be zero space between the trigger guard and the holster if you are going to be, that close to children. Because my 6-month-old, and yes, you could say 6-month-old isn't strong enough to blah, blah, blah. We just covered that, right? Like you never know what's going to happen and you never know the creativity and you never know how they're going to make it happen, right? But let's just eliminate the possibility. Let's choose the safer way and just not have it be a question that we're even going to entertain, right? If I have a well-fitted holster that has molding all the way around the trigger guard area, it doesn't matter whether or not he's strong enough. He can't even access it. And that's the safer way. And so there'd be times where maybe he would start to pull on it and I'd redirect his hand and I'd say, nope, you can touch it. You can touch the grip, but you can't pull on it. That's mommy's. You don't touch. And after a while, he would realize that's not acceptable. I can't touch mom's gun. And then there would be other times, one of my other rules, because kids are so distracting, right? One of my other rules is I don't get my gun on. I don't get geared up in the same room as my children. So if I need to change something, because I never wanted to be in a position where maybe I'm racking a slide or something like that and someone comes running in and is like, Mom, he hit me, and I'm distracted. And then I point a gun at something, or do something with a firearm that I'm not 100% mindfully in. So that was a practice that I'd put in place. And do you think my kids tested me on that? Of course they did. Every once in a while, the door would be locked and someone would be knocking on the door. Mom, this is going on. And I'd be like, hey, hold on, I'm coming. Now, as they got older and we were able to have that conversation about, hey, if mom is handling a gun, wait till mom puts it away. And then, things could change as they got older, but we needed to have those conversations. When they were really little, the rule was we were very big fans of the Eddie Eagle, the NRA's Eddie Eagle program, which is, hey, what happens when you come across a gun? Stop, don't touch it, leave the area, tell an adult. Those are fantastic rules. The little song, stop, don't touch, leave the area, tell an adult. I mean, we got the whole thing. And I think that's the perfect way to set up young kids for success. As they got a little older and a little bit more curious, we welcomed questions. If you have any questions about guns, if you want to touch a gun, if you want to handle a gun, if you want to shoot a gun, all you have to do is ask. Because we had a strong belief, and I still believe this, that it is curiosity that drives more bad behavior than it is anything else, especially when it comes to firearms, right? They want to know a question and they don't feel safe enough to come to you to get, educated or whatever. So they go looking for it on their own. And that's when problems happen, or they come across it on their own. How many kids have come across a firearm while they were looking for Christmas presents? So many. If I could tell you how many times that is the story that I hear when people talk about, that's how I found a gun in my dad's room or whatever. The number one story, kids were looking for Christmas presents. They come across a hidden gun and they don't know what to do with it. Number one way. They weren't actually looking for the gun. They were looking for something else and they came across it. Now, were they doing what they weren't supposed to be doing? Yes. But that's how it happens, right? So, so that's how we kind of started that conversation about, hey, let's take away the curiosity. We took them to do shooting sports when they were ready, and we never pushed it on them. If they were curious, they were open to it. If they didn't want to, they didn't have to. And that has worked out really well for us. And it, like you said, it very much is going to depend on their developmental level. There are going to be some kids who are never going to be developmentally ready to have that conversation because they're not ever going to understand the importance or the responsibility. And that's unfortunate. But most kids at some point in time are going to developmentally be able to understand this is a dangerous tool. This is something that we don't touch without permission. I think of it no differently than trying to tell a child about either sex or about driving, drinking. That's the kind of level, like when you're starting to talk to kids about those kinds of things and the seriousness of them and having conversations at each developmental level, you have different conversations with your kids about those things, right? The same is true when it comes to firearms. It really depends on their developmental level and what you want them to do when they're presented with that information, whether it's, okay, I'm of the age right now, I don't touch, or I'm of the age now where I feel like maybe I can touch, but with supervision. Now you're getting to the point where maybe you can go and do the thing, but you're still kind of in a probation period sort of thing. So maybe you can have it, but maybe you don't have any ammunition, things like that. So I won't ever tell anybody like at the age 10, you can do this because it's just going to be very dependent.
That makes a lot of sense. So many thoughts came up when you were talking. I was like taking notes because I don't want to forget this. Besides going into kind of concealment gear and how things change from there, that's definitely a big topic I want to cover with you. I'm going to give you two questions, and you let me know where you want to go, and then the other one we can do later. But okay. First of all, how do you ever talk about how children should navigate conversations about firearms with their friends or if they're at a friend's house? That's one that came to mind. And actually, let's just start there. That's the best way to do this, I think.
So I always told my kids, especially when they were really little, that talking about firearms is like talking about your private parts, right? You don't advertise that you have one. You kind of keep it quiet. There are some people you probably shouldn't talk to about firearms because they're not gonna understand. And we've had those conversations with kids younger. We've been careful to shame them for because having and owning a firearm is nothing to be ashamed about. That's a personal thing that I'm very pro Second Amendment, obviously not ashamed of having firearms. And I understand that my situation might be different than people's situations. There might be people who live or operate or work in environments where if it even got out that they owned a firearm, it could have big social consequences for them. So they might choose to, one, not to even disclose to their children that they carry a gun. And they might be much more adamant to their children. We do not talk about guns. You do not ask, if anybody tells or asks you, lie to them. That might be their priority, and I won't tell them they're wrong. Right. So this is going to be very dependent upon you, your situation, your family, and again, what you want that outcome to be. Right. Any kid in my school or my kid's school who Googles my name is like, who's your mom? And Googles it, they're going to know that we have firearms. So we've never had that rule of like, hey, don't ever talk about it. But we have set parameters around like, hey, if you're going to talk about it, speak respectfully about it. Be respectful of other people's ideals. Now, when it comes to like talking to other families, I've never had this be a problem for me. I have had people who've chosen not to let their kids come over to my house because they were anti-gun and they just didn't even want their child to be exposed to that. If that's their choice, that's their choice. But I'm always very free and very open to talk to people. If a parent ever came to me and was like, I know that you're a gun person. I'm uncomfortable with my child being in your home with guns. Can you talk me through that? I would be happy to do that. And I would say, absolutely, this is how we store our guns. These are the regulations on when we take them out and things like that. That being said, there have been a couple of times where I've had to have that conversation with other people. And I'd have to say, do you have any firearms in the home? And how do you store them? Because if my child's going to be here, I want to make sure that I know my kids, but I also know that kids are kids, right? And you can have as many rules in the world. But when kids, especially when they get together, it's like the rules sometimes don't exist anymore because they want to show their, like, you're not supposed to be doing that. Well, they just wanted to see the thing, I understand that, but it's still against the rules, that kind of thing. So, and I think that's part of it too, is just being mindful of the fact that your kids are still kids. And your kids are going to sometimes say things that you're like, can you not? And preparing them, I have been really impressed by parents who have made sure to teach their kids the 4 rules of gun safety, have drilled them on that. If your teacher ever asks about this, this is how you respond. If your playmates ever ask about this, and this is how you respond. I think those are all good things to do. And I think there's no too early time to do that. I think that you can do that as soon as they pop out, just like hold them up when they're a blob and be like, listen, kid, because eventually it will get through. You might have to do it more than once though.
Right. Of course. I love that you're calling it a blob. I'm going to text my sister immediately after this and be like, how's my blob today? I call him Squish because he just like,
Aww.
He's so squishy. Anyway, I love him. I've had so many
babies are adorable,
right? I have so many friends with babies. Well, not so many, enough, I guess. So, by the time my sister had a baby, I was like, oh, it's not going to be any different. It is so different. I'm like, I'm an auntie now. I'm like, I will fight the world for you kind of thing, when I'm holding him. And, anyway, but I love.
You need to come to our class and do it and figure out how to do well.
Yes, please. Because watching my sister's eyes, like, do that while I was like taking her baby, she was like, oh my God, but apparently I'm doing a good job. So, but yes, I absolutely would love to do that. And actually I have a friend, who I visit when I travel for live fire, and, she always asks me when I go into her house. She has a toddler, 3 years old, and then coming up on a 1-year-old. And she asks me to put my firearm in her safe when I'm in her home. And that is like, I'm in her home. It's her rules. I'll fight someone with a knife from the kitchen if I have to, like breaking and entering. But like when I'm there, it goes straight into the safe, and that's how she's comfortable, and that's how we do things. If I bring in like unloaded guns from the range, because I'll go to the range while I'm up there, I just put them in her bedroom and she locks the door. So she has like these little rules in place because she knows how we work. That was actually really exciting. For me, I was really nervous to go over to her house for the first time with children, because they don't own guns. They're not very 2A advocate-y. So when I came over, she was like, I'm assuming you're carrying, so let's have a conversation. And I love that she initiated it. And now when I go to people's houses and they have kids, that's something I try to do. Is that something you also talk about, like how to, like when you go into someone's home, since it's like their private property, because there are people out there that's like, you can't take my gun off of me, or like I might as well not come over. But that's just not how that dynamic can work. Like I can't see Abby unless I go to her house because she's so busy as a mom. So how would you say one could navigate that best?
Well, and that is so complicated because you're right. Like there are some, and it really comes down to priorities. And I know some people who are genuinely, like you said, I will not be disarmed. Either they've had an experience or they've been around people who've had experience or they understand and they're just like, nope, never again. Like if you don't want me to carry a gun in your house, then I guess I'm not coming over. And I'm not saying that's wrong. I would never say that that's wrong if that is your priority and that is your prerogative. Get on with your bad self. Like that is completely fine. Now that means you're going to have a trade-off, right? And that trade-off is going to be that you're not going to go over to that friend's house. And if that's okay with you, then that's okay with you. But there are times when, yeah, you might have to make a sacrifice. Now, that being said, there are some times where, depending, what you don't know won't hurt you, kind of a thing. Great example. My family knows that I carry. My mother's side of the family is far more anti-gun than my father's side of the family. We were invited to my cousin's wedding, and we were specifically asked not to carry a gun. And it was an outdoor wedding. It was in a very urban area, a downtown urban area. And my thought at that time is fully understanding that it would make my family very upset. I was like heck, they're not going to tell me that I can't carry a gun at this wedding. So in a black cocktail dress, I wore a .32 in a bra holster. Now, I would have challenged God himself to find that gun on me. And yes, he would have found it. But I'm saying my concealment was so superb that, believe it or not, like my uncle came up to me and he looked me over head to toe and he went, "There is no way you're carrying a gun in that dress." And I went, and I absolutely was carrying a gun in that dress. Ironically, 5 minutes after we left, they had a drunk person wander into the tent where they were having the wedding, and the first person they asked for was me. And so they were willing to disarm me, but also willing to volunteer me for potential danger, knowing that I was more willing to confront it. So I didn't appreciate that very much either. You don't want me to be armed, but at the same time, you want to leverage me. Not super cool. But the point I'm trying to make there is, it really depends on what you're willing to risk. I was completely willing in that moment to risk my parent, or, the risk of them finding out was so low. So I would have had to make a huge concealment error, or just be a jerk and tell everybody that I was armed in order for that to be a problem. And that's where deep concealment has a huge benefit, right? You can have someone who says, "No, I don't want you to carry a gun." And you can go, "Okay, I respect that," and still carry a gun anyway. But you have to recognize that you are risking the potential ending of that friendship should they find out about that. So that is something. And that being said, in someone's home, I think of that as a little bit different, because inside somebody's home, they are allowed to set the rules for what's going to happen inside their home. So I'm much more likely to abide by the rules if I'm going to enter into somebody's home than if they're inviting me to something and they're like, "I don't want you to carry when you come to this." I'm like, you don't get to decide what I do in this public space. No, you don't get to determine that. But in their home, I will take that on a case-by-case basis, and I will also take that on, and then I'm willing to also have a conversation with them. All right, you don't want me to carry in your home. That's totally fine. I respect that. Can we have a conversation about why that is? Is it that you're afraid that I'm not safely carrying? Are you, because then we can start having a conversation about what it is that they're actually worried about when it comes to guns. And that might actually go a lot further than, being confrontational about it, because you might actually have someone who goes, "Wow, I guess I don't have to be that afraid. I just didn't understand. I didn't understand all the safety measures in place. And I didn't understand how much respect you give this topic. And I didn't understand how well trained you were. And now that you've told me about all these things, maybe this isn't as big of a deal."
SOG knives began with the mission to reproduce the original SOG Bowie knife used by the Special Ops Unit MACV SOG. Today, SOG knives are carried with confidence into the most demanding situations. Forged out of tradition, hardened in the field, honed for you, whether you're protecting others or leading an epic hunting expedition, tackling one of life's everyday challenges, or facing your most extreme conditions yet, lead the way with SOG. What began as a single commemorative model soon became a full line of innovative tools, field-proven by U.S. Special Forces, even honored as the Navy SEAL knife of choice. I've personally carried SOG knives since I added knives to my everyday carry setup, and have yet to be disappointed by their design and durability. Their craftsmanship is rooted in legacy of honor and courage, and is unmatched. With SOG by your side, you are equipped to lead the way, no matter the challenge. Join the ranks of those who dare to push beyond limits and define their own legacy, and use code SHESHIELD to support the pod and to save. That's SHESHIELD at checkout. I love that. Yes. First of all, thank you, because this is not the first time, I'm going to be asked to either disarm or not even come armed. I would have done the same thing in your situation. In fact, on my wedding day, I called Lisa and I was like, "Hey, you going to be armed at my wedding? Because I don't think I can get a gun in this dress." And I also don't know. I don't know if I want to. I just had this whole, I don't know. I also knew I was going to have champagne, and I was like, should I have champagne? And I'm a lightweight. I will have, it's ridiculous. I always tell my husband, he doesn't drink, but I'm like, if you understood, I am a cheap date. You could get me half a cocktail and I'd be done. So all of that said, I knew if I had even the champagne for our toast, that I was going to be toast. You feel me? So I called my people that I knew would carry guns, and I was like, "Hey y'all, are you going to be, are you going to be armed at my wedding?" And they're like, "Do you want me to be?" And I was like, "What do you think?" So I had a few people there that were just designated people that I felt safe with. It was kind of an interesting scenario I had to think through. So anyway, I'm really glad we're having this conversation. And I guess I didn't think to talk to my friend, because I walked in the house and, it's new parent house, just stuff everywhere. And she's frazzled. She's got a baby crying. I'm not going to in that moment, in this context, I was like, yes, I will take my gun off. If that will bring some peace to our meeting, I'm happy to do that, And so,
and that's you being empathetic and considerate of her. And I don't think that anybody can go wrong by being considerate and empathetic when they're given an option to do so. Because I think that empathy and that consideration that you showed for her is much more likely to have her then turn around and show that same consideration to you when you're ready to have that conversation, versus you being upfront about it and being confrontational about it.
Yes, that's such a good point. Because if we were to go to a public event together, she might wonder, since my kids are going to be around, and we could be in a bad part of downtown. And, yeah, absolutely. Something I dislike so much. So my husband and I are metalheads. We love metal concerts. We like to crowd surf. He likes to mosh pit. I can't mosh pit anymore because someone shoves me and I'm just I can't do it. In fact, kind of off topic here, our first mosh pit, I didn't know what a mosh pit was. Okay. And we were in the middle of it. So all these people start punching each other, I think, right? I think they're punching each other. So I grab my husband by his shirt and I'm like, "We're out of here." And I'm finding our path through the crowd. And he's like, "Relax. We're in a mosh pit." And I was like, "What is that? A what? A what pit?" Sounds nasty. Anyway, so all of that to say, we'll go to metal concerts and they won't be in the best location, but they'll have metal detectors. And I'm always like, crap, this is one of the top places I would want to carry. And I've had to go back to my car before and hide my pistol in the car. And and that's when I started to wonder about car safes for situations like that. Which, man, we could get into that all day long. But
yes, we could.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate, some of the locations that guns aren't allowed, or that people feel would be safer without an armed citizen who has passed a background check, who trains and who carries responsibly and in a good holster, would be. So yeah, it's insane. I'm glad we're talking about this. Something I'm really curious about, I didn't grow up with family that hunts, but I've heard just horror stories about, firearms in a home that were, intended for hunting that were still loaded, and how even like the conversation around guns was more lenient because the point of that gun was for hunting. It's not for defense. So there wasn't as much safety briefing on that. Is there anything you would want to like contribute to that specific conversation or how that changes the dynamic?
Well, it's funny you say that because that's exactly how I grew up. I grew up with hunting was we had a lot of guns. There was no concealed carry in in Wisconsin. I grew up in Wisconsin. So nobody carried a gun. Like the idea of carrying a gun on your person for self-defense was not really something that was introduced to me until I was well into my adulthood. But hunting was everywhere. And the way that I was raised was very much, if the gun is unloaded, you can do whatever you want to with it. There's actually a picture of me, and I will never go find this picture, but I know it exists, holding a revolver to my best friend's head because it was empty. I was, I think, 11 at the time. And the fact that the adults in the room allowed this to happen horrifies me. And that's part of the issue, right? I'm 10 years old. I have no idea how dangerous this is or anything. All I know is that the adults in the room thought this would be funny and set it up and made it happen. And now as an adult, I look back at that and I am so thankful that nothing went wrong, of course, but I actually had a conversation with my parents, several years after I started getting into this and, going back, visiting my parents and bringing my kids into this home, knowing full well that my parents still have firearms in the home. I specifically sat down with my parents and had the conversation. The way that you raised us around firearms was negligent. And I love you and I care about you and I'm not at all angry at you. But as someone who now does this on a professional level and has learned better, the way that you guys stored and handled firearms around us when we were younger was straight up negligent. And as an adult now and a professional and someone with kids who is bringing these kids into this environment, this is how I would be more comfortable if you adjusted. Of course, I'm not going to go into my parents' home and tell them, you need to do it this way or we're out of here. But I am going to have that conversation about, hey, my kids are now here. And to my parents' credit, my dad bought a really nice gun safe. He's put he was willing, to listen to me as an adult and as a professional in a way that he was never able to, understand when we were little. And I'm very grateful that nothing happened. And I think that sometimes, and because we hear this all the time, right? People say, well, this is the way I've been doing it all my life. And there's never been a problem, or it's been so far so good. There's a couple reasons why that happens. One, hunting season usually comes around once a year because most people don't do all the hunting things. They usually have deer or duck or whatever it is. They have the thing that they go hunting for. And so hunting season comes, so that time that they're actually handling the firearm is very limited. It's a very limited time. And they have their rules around there. And frankly, a lot of people just get lucky. They get lucky that they don't ever have an issue. My brother did accidentally shoot himself in a hunting accident, and he is very lucky to be alive to this day. But part of that was because of the poor handling that was allowed at the time, and being able to once survive that and then look back at it. The idea, if we know better, we should do better. And there's a time you can either cling to your ignorance and you can be like, no, this is the way that we've always done things and it's always worked out so far, so we're just going to keep doing it that way. That has a huge risk associated to it. And I don't think that's the smartest way to go forward, right? I remember at one point in time, I had an unloaded gun. I was at the gun store. This was where I was working, and I was resting the muzzle of the gun into the palm of my hand because I was handing it to a customer. I was handing it like this, and the muzzle was resting in my hand. And my manager looked at me and he said, "What are you doing pointing a gun at your hand?" And I said, "Well, it's unloaded." And he said, "Well, what are the 4 rules of gun safety?" And I was like, never point your muzzle at anything that you don't want, and and he was like, if you know better, why aren't you doing better? And I was like, oh. And that was a big rebuke on me, right? Like, if I know better, why aren't I doing better? And I was like, because I'm getting lazy with this, and I didn't think that it applied here. But you're right, it actually does apply here. And that's when I decided, like, no, I do know better. I should do better. And I think that a lot of times people just think of it, it becomes a pride issue, right? Well, that's never been a problem for me before. This isn't about your pride. This is about knowing better and then doing better so that we can prevent this from ever happening.
Yes. Amen. Amen. I feel the need to say it. I actually, before this call, I told Melody about a situation recently where I definitely looked down someone's muzzle. I could see the slide lock to the rear. I could see no mag, but I didn't know it was unloaded. Could have like racked that slide forward and popped off a shot, for all I knew. And of course, the guy operating the gun, he was like, kind of looking at it like he didn't really know what to look for. So I remember being like, all of it was bad. And I had to go over to the person working the RSO of that moment, of that like situation. I'm trying to be very vague here and be like, hey, this is unacceptable. To which I was told the gun was unloaded. And I was like, well, first of all, I don't know that, and secondly, no. I was just like, absolutely not. Like, I can't be worried the whole day that I'm going to get shot. So, part of the inclination I felt to go and actually say something was because I took your class and you just did not tolerate that. And I was like, oh my God, like this queen, and I'm not saying that I've tolerated unsafe practices in my classes, but I have given people way too many chances. That's something that I have reflected on recently. I didn't expect to go here today. We're talking about youngins with guns, but I've also been I've been an instructor, and luckily only one person signed up for this class. And I remember being kind of like, oh, like one person, that's okay. It was a very old gentleman. And he would not take his finger off the trigger. We spent so much time with the blue gun, and towards the end of the time with the blue gun, he was doing well. But by the time we got on the range, I was sweating bullets. Ironically, I was sweating just trying to get him to not do that, and I was basically hovering over him. He was smaller than me. I'm 5'10", and I had a little bit of a heel on. So I was like over him, just like ready. And like, I hated to be that close to him. That's anxiety provoking, but I didn't trust him not to just freaking shoot me. And so I actually ended him about 30 minutes early, which sounds like a lot, but I should have stopped him way earlier. I mean, he could not comprehend. At one point, I thought it was his hearing. And then I asked him a question in like a pretty low voice, even for the range, and he answered it fine. So I was like, he can hear me. He's just not comprehending. And so,
or he's comprehending. He's just overwhelmed.
Ooh, yes. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because that happens sometimes.
Okay.
And that's actually a conversation that I had with Craig Douglas once. Because Craig made a very, very good point that sometimes it's not about comprehension. It's about both just the physical ability to, and the awareness of because you do jujitsu and other martial arts. People who do things like jujitsu, boxing, martial arts, yoga have a much higher body awareness of what they're doing than people who don't, right? And so you can have someone who you can tell them your finger's on the trigger, right? And they are comprehending what you are saying, but they don't have the proprioception and the body awareness to confirm what you're saying. They're like, what? My finger's on the trigger? No. All the while standing there with their finger on the trigger. And it takes you then allowing for the pathways for them to have that awareness of what their body is doing, which usually takes a lot more physicality than what a lot of people, I think, understand. This is something that I've learned through all the courses of being a firearms instructor. And this is why I do believe that demonstrating, like doing demos, is so important. And we should be way more physically hands-on with our students than this idea that you can teach someone how to shoot a gun without ever touching them. You very well may be able to do that, but they're going to learn faster if there is a physical component with you than they than if you're just trying to talk them through it. And if you can just talk them through it, that's fantastic. That's great. I think that you should have all sorts of different tools in your toolbox to help people understand. But there is way more of a physical component to shooting than I think a lot of firearms instructors and even people who shoot understand. The high level shooters almost universally do understand that, because they've gotten to the point where they're like, oh no, yeah, shooting is definitely a physical sport. But a lot of people who come into it think like, it's just shooting, right? It's just, it's just sights and a trigger. And what do you mean? It's a physical thing? What? It is.
I appreciate your transparency with that. I absolutely, like, reflecting, I'm like, duh, he must have absolutely been overwhelmed. And, yeah, I almost feel silly for not considering that. I guess in my head, this early on in my shooting career, and instructing career especially, oh my gosh, I'm so new to it. I'm taking the Rangemaster certification course later this month, like I mentioned to you. And I just got to this place where actually came from a conversation with Lena Mitchell. She's been a really big influence in like my career path. And she was, instead of telling me what to do with my career path, she was like, you need to reflect on like, what is your goal right now? And upon reflection, I realized my goal is just to learn more. Like I'm trying to put out things without knowing enough to put out. So I'm really excited to continue my journey there. And I think part of that is being able to recognize things like, is this person not able to comprehend, or is it that they're overwhelmed and we need to take a step back?
And to be completely clear, it certainly could be that they weren't comprehending either. I didn't want you to think that I was like, no,
right.
They were definitely comprehending, Sophia, and you just didn't. No, because sometimes that is an issue too, for sure. Then there's always, when people talk about communication, right? There's what you intend to say. There's what you say. There's what the person hears physically, the words that they hear, and then there's the way that they interpret those words. And all of those things need to be in line for actual comprehension to take place, because Lord knows we have all had moments where we said the thing, something as simple as press the magazine release and drop the magazine. And you said the correct words, you had the correct intent, and someone drops a slide. And you're like, what? And they're like, well, you said to, because they're thinking in their head, this button is, and they heard the words, and they understood, even they might have understood your intent, but they either did the wrong thing, whatever it is. There's just this little break in that line of communication that just sends everything out of haywire, that you're like, okay, well, let's go over what your gun is and what the different buttons do on your firearm, which is, like ideally, obviously, you're taking care of that kind of stuff a little bit earlier, but those things happen all the time, right? And that's where teaching becomes so complicated sometimes, because you have to understand your intent, you have to understand the words, but then you also have to prepare your student to receive those words in the spirit of your intention and be able to interpret them in the way that you need them to in order for both of you to have a good experience. And that's difficult for anybody in anything that you are trying to teach.
Absolutely. I feel like that applies to just general conversation. Intention versus
100%.
Right. Intention versus impact is something my husband and I, it's like a reoccurring phrase in all of our conversations. It's like, yes, like I see the impact I had. That was not my intention. I can apologize for the impact, but I could still have this intention kind of thing. It's like one of the best things I ever got from therapy. So you're so right. And thank you for that. I think it's almost like actually shooting a gun as opposed to dry fire. I think it's just going to take me, like, one, taking the proper courses and preparing myself, doing my due diligence, but also just having the experience dealing with people from different backgrounds, levels of comprehension, and also how much I'm loading onto them in that moment, and like finding that balance. So, and for anyone...
Well, having seen you shoot, you're an amazing shooter.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I really do. I AI'd for Riley Bowman this past weekend at A Girl and a Gun, and man, did I just... He had me, I shouldn't even be saying this, I'm focusing on the negative stuff, but he had me demo a few drills, and I just wanted to like take my badge off and walk out, because I was like, What is happening? I think I did some better shooting at tours, but it's definitely, it fluctuates, and I'm learning how I do under pressure more. Even like USPSA is different than like a whole class of students watching you when you've had this like instructor like level badge on yourself. Like that is a totally different level of pressure. So I've been learning about myself as a shooter as well as an instructor. That's been super interesting. I know that today we talked about making that a topic. And I have questions for you there if you don't mind. Before we do that though, I want to make sure for the women that are listening, and of course, this is not a substitution to taking the armed parent. If you are listening and you're like, now I don't need to go take it, that's not the intention. It's to expose you to what Melody has to offer, what her colleagues have to offer, and encourage you to do some research into what classes are near you and, what can you do to go take one. So with that said, baby wearing and carrying, how do you start off instructing people with gear? I looked at your website and you give a list of gear that people have to bring. You recommend that they bring to your class. Mm-hmm. How do you get into that with people who are coming in with like maybe just like a store-bought holster that they don't really understand? Do you have examples there? And what do you ultimately recommend? I know that was a lot.
So when it comes to the baby wearing and carrying, I want to get back to the place where we have more of that in the armed parent, because obviously that was its origin. And then as we got more into like the tactics and techniques, we cut out a little bit more of like the carrying things, because most of the people who actually come to the armed parent have kind of figured out how to carry, and kind of want to get back into that a little bit because, one, the holster is 99% of what's going to make or break your carrying experience. Comfort, ability to retain the firearm, the ability to just have it be secure. All of those things are going to be largely dependent on the holster more so than anything else. Like I said, I'm a really, really big proponent of hard-shelled Kydex holsters over anything else, particularly around children, because one of the things that is unique about being around children versus any other environment that you're going to be in is that you're going to have to bend over and pick your kids up. You're going to have to get on the floor and change the diaper. You're going to have to contort and move your body in ways that if I were just sitting at a desk at an office for 8 hours would never have to do. And my personal belief is that if I can't do everything that I want to do with my child because I'm carrying a gun, then that's a big problem, because my children, my first and primary role is to be a human being and to be a mother, not to be an armed person, right? Like not to be a guard. Like my first job, if you want to be a bodyguard or you want to have a bodyguard, go and hire a bodyguard. You're not a bodyguard. You are a parent who happens to be armed. Be a parent. And I think that's where people start to fall down, is they think and we've actually had people who say, yeah, my job when we go to the park is to be the person who sits there and watches, with my gun on, and because I can't carry a gun while doing these things. Then who's playing with your kids? Like, the whole reason you're there is to be a parent and be part and be active with them. So be that way. And if your gear can't make that happen, get better gear. Don't forget to have that life. I have a saying that I say all the time. Don't let your desire to protect your life keep you from living a life worth protecting. That includes being a parent, right? Be the parent that you need to be. And I get really passionate about that because it ticks me off when people say that. Don't use that as an excuse to get out of parenting, right? Because it's a terrible excuse. So get a better holster. And that's going to be something that's molded to your make and model of firearm. It's going to have a nice trigger guard cover, and it's probably going to be a hard Kydex more than anything else. Possibly molded leather, but I prefer hard-sided Kydex. And then as far as like where to carry it, I know this seems pretty obvious, but you'd be surprised at how many people, don't quite understand this. You're probably going to have to carry the gun on the opposite side that you carry the baby. So if the baby is small and tiny and you're just front carrying them, your gun's probably going to be on your strong side hip or behind the hip. That being said, if you've got a baby that is you're carrying them, they're a little bit older and they've got that good head control and chest or core control, and you're carrying them on the back, you're probably going to be carrying appendix. And this is where I get really frosty about people who say, like, pick a carry position and stick with it, and, don't switch your gun around. If you are carrying a child and you're doing all the other things, you're not going to be able to stick to just one carry position. Not and be comfortable and not actually be able to carry or draw your gun either. Because here's the thing. If I've got a 3-year-old on my back and I've got my gun in the 3 o'clock position, my child is sitting on my gun. And there's no way that I'm going to be able to draw that effectively while that's in the position, and it's going to be extremely uncomfortable for me. And so for people who are like, well, I don't think appendix carry is safe, or I don't think, one, we've already demonstrated a million different ways in which it is safe. But if you're going to tell some woman who attachment wears her child and puts on the back that she can't carry an appendix position because she chooses to be an attachment, mother, I think that's wrong. I don't think that that's adequately preparing her for what she can safely do. And I think that it behooves us to be like, all right, let's figure out how that you can do this as safely as possible so that you can be the kind of parent that you want to be and also be armed, because that's the ultimate goal here. You want to be a good the best parent that you know how to be, but you also want to be armed and be able to protect yourself. Let's get you to that goal instead of telling you that you can't do it. Now, there might be things that, yes, you shouldn't do it. For instance, one thing that I did see happen was one woman decided to carry a gun in the carrier with her child, no holster. Don't do that. That's not good. That's bad. All right. We should have standards here. So I'm not going to say like, oh, this is the end state, whatever happens to get to this end state. No, safety 100% comes first. Let's make sure that we're doing it correctly so that you are safe as well as your child are safe, for sure. Let's make sure that those things are put into place. But once we have checked those boxes, let's figure out how we can make it work for you. So that gun being carried, it's probably going to be an appendix carry position while your baby's on your back. There might be some things that you might need to change about some of your selections. So for instance, the carriers, baby carriers usually have really wide belts on them. I'm talking very wide, like 2-inch belts. You might have to contact a holster maker and ask them specifically to send you 2-inch belt loops and actually use the belt loop of the carrier as your mounting point rather than something else. So you might have to make some adjustments like that. And one, I think that instead of having people who don't know what the options are, having information like this that we can get out and say, it's okay to contact your holster maker and be like, hey, I need 2-inch loops. I know that you sell standard 1.5-inch loops. Can I get 2-inch loops? And if they ask you, what are you using it for? Just tell them I'm putting it around a baby carrier and, I need this. And instead of the holster makers going, what? Why would you want to do that? They understand, oh no, this is part of the process. Absolutely. Let's try and help you out here. And knowing that the consumers can ask for those things and it's a reasonable ask.
Thank you for sharing all of that. I already feel prepared. I think that's actually one of the things I've thought about when it comes to being a future mom. Like, how is this going to make my life different as someone who conceals daily? It's already hard enough, right, to like put a piece of metal against your body, but to do that with a child in consideration that is constantly growing and it's causing you to adapt your carry model. I'm just really glad that this episode will be out there for people to hear. Something that I'd love for you to speak on is off-body carry with a child, and also a little clarification on carriers and like what you mean by mounting it to a carrier. I think I'm just not visualizing that because sure. I don't have the experience, but something that encouraged me to get this episode out there sooner than later is at a local gym. One of my coaches She found out what I do for a living. And I always start with like, I work for a tech company with live fire. Technically that's true. And then I'll say,
Yeah.
right. And then I'll be like, yeah, I also do self-defense stuff on the side. And then I kind of gauge where they're at as I go. So she's someone that I talk to frequently. So it came up organically, and she was like, oh my God, do you want to see my gun? And I was like, maybe, like, it depends. And I was like, do you have a picture? And she was like, no, like, come with me. So we go like to this back office. She pulls out her fanny pack. And so I asked her, I'm like, hey, what direction is the muzzle pointed in right now? And she was like, oh, I don't know. And I was like, okay. So I was like, let's, she like was bound and determined to show me this. And I thought maybe like there was a reason, maybe I should see it. So she starts unzipping it. Muzzle's pointed towards us. So she flips it around. She did that on her own. And then she opens it, and I was like, I told her like to stop, because it was only being held in this fanny pack by a small, I think what belt keepers are made of, those like, it's just elastic. And there's no kydex, there's no cover at all over the trigger guard. And in fact, the thing covering the trigger guard was the elastic plastic, which I'm just pretty sure I could pull the trigger through. So she's holding this fanny pack too flat, because she knows if she holds it angled, the gun will fall out. So I asked her to just go ahead and zip it up. I acted like I knew what gun she had. I was like, that's a great gun. So I'd love to talk to you, if you're open to this, about some considerations. And we had a really long conversation about it. And of course, she led to telling me that her husband picked out the fanny pack for her and the gun, and there was no conversation about safety. And it was the first time I had to navigate kind of saying, without saying your husband has done you a disservice, because that wasn't his intention. That was just the impact it had. So I kind of had to say something like, have you considered getting instruction by someone who actually carries in a fanny pack, or looking into fanny pack carry resources, off-body carry resources? And ultimately, she told me that she was carrying this for the protection of her children. And of course, when she picked up this fanny pack, it had been on a pile of her things in the corner of the room. So all of this just came together, and I was like, wow, there's so much I want to cover here. All of that to say, what is your stance on off-body carry? And I'm sure there's a bunch of context, so I just love to hear it all.
There is. So my take on off-body carry around children is that it's negligent. And the reason I think that is because, especially around children, we cannot maintain the amount of focused awareness that is necessary in order to do off-body carry right when there are so many distractions. And I'll give you a for instance. I was doing an actual purse carry article that I was supposed to be writing about. So I was testing, and these were legitimate concealed carry purses. These were not like just purses that we were dropping guns in. They were carry purses. And the entire article was basically like how to do it right, what are good carry purses, going to the range, the whole thing. But I had children at the time, right? So I was like, okay, I not only need to do this right for the article and for the content, but also to make sure that my kids aren't at an additional danger as well. So I started out by carrying a blue gun in the purse. So I had my live gun on me, and I had the blue gun in the purse. And the first thing that I wanted to evaluate was whether or not I could maintain the level of awareness of the bag with the gun in it while I was around my kids. Because if I couldn't do that, then there's no reason for me to go on further in my testing, because safety is first. So I actually ended up abandoning that entire series because I could not maintain the amount of dedicated focus, and the amount of dedicated focus was literally exhausting. So, and this was just a blue gun. I had a blue gun in a purse. If we were at a restaurant and I needed to go and get some extra ketchup, I had to make sure that I put the gun, put and go over there, because I'm not going to leave. So this is the way that I tell people to think about it. If you would not take a holstered gun, a gun with a holster on it, and leave it wherever it is you're leaving it, why would you do that with a purse gun? because that's essentially what you're doing. If you would not take a gun that's in a holster and put it next to your child in the shopping cart and then walk away from your child and go and, get something, why would you do that with a gun in a purse? Because that's exactly what it is. Just because you can't see the grip doesn't change, what it actually is. And so what ended up happening that made me abandon this was I was meeting my husband somewhere for dinner, and me and my children had arrived early enough that we were waiting, and so I allowed my kids to get out from the seat belts and stuff like that. So we're all still in the car, and we were waiting for my husband to get there. My purse with the blue gun still in it was on the passenger side of the car. My kids were all running around in the back of my car, doing what kids do. And I was on the phone with my husband looking out the window because he was supposed to be arriving. So I'm looking out the window on the phone with him, trying to see if I could see him. And I turned to find my youngest going through my purse. That's how quickly it happened. And I was very, very grateful that that was just a blue gun. It wasn't a live gun. But we're talking about someone who is actively trying to be engaged at 100% of the time. And that's when I was like, I can't do this. Like, I cannot safely do this. And I don't think anybody can, because you have these little, people around you who have their own will. And we forget commonly what we're doing with purses, right? I walk in from my day at my job. I throw my purse down next to my desk. How many people who come home from doing grocery shopping take their purse and put it in a safe before they start unpackaging all of the groceries that they're putting away? No one does. We put it on the kitchen table and we put all this stuff away. But that's what will be required of you if you're carrying in a purse, particularly around children. Something else that happens, especially with off-body carry, you hear about people who advocate for putting guns in the diaper bags. Guns do not belong in diaper bags because the diaper bag is the thing that goes with the children. And I have heard of people who've forgotten guns in diaper bags and then handed the diaper bag to the daycare workers. And it's been hanging up at the daycare in the midst of multiple children. And no adult knew it was there. No adult knew how to take care of it. I mean, that should never happen, ever, period. But it has happened, and it is horrifying when it does. And we are incredibly blessed that more children do not get injured when things like that happen. So now that does not mean that I don't think that off-body carry should ever be done. I think that it can safely be done in short periods of time where there's not a lot of chaos and not around children. Those are my criteria. I'm talking 4 hours or less. 4 hours of less at a nice dinner with a purse gun. Absolutely. Totally fine. Like you can do that. At church or something like that, where your kids are crawling underneath of rows and stuff like that, I'd be less likely to be inclined to agree to that.
Absolutely. In fact, the church fanny pack thing has happened to me. My mother-in-law has been like, hey, you can set your bag down. And I was like, I can't. She's like, no, seriously, it's fine. No one's going to take it here. And I was like, okay, I'm going to wear it though. And I'm like,
And fanny packs are fantastic because at least they can be attached to you, and you can move around.
Yes.
But yeah.
That's something I've been recently diving into, which at some point would love to have a off-camera talk with you because there's some stuff coming up. But I did do like a YouTube review of fanny pack carry, and the big joke is that I say contraindications in it so many times. I come from a pre-med background, and like Tessa brought it up, Riley brought it up, just like how many times I say I didn't mean to do that. I don't know. Sometimes you don't realize how much you're saying a particular word, and the idea was like. There are so many caveats to off-body carry. And I find fanny pack carry to be an in-between in a way, but it definitely, in my opinion, is towards the extreme of off-body because it's so easy to just unclip and set down and then forget. So,
and I think when it comes to baby carriers, like we were talking about, I think fanny pack carry has a huge leg up because you can just get one one holster system that you can safely, provided, it's got a good holster on the inside of it and all that kind of stuff, that will fit pretty much any carrier. So you asked about carriers, and different types of carriers.
Please.
I could not, we would be here for 2 hours if I tried to list them all, but essentially there are a couple of big categories. There are like your sling type carriers. There are your wraps, which are basically long pieces of fabric that you literally like tie your child to you, which I love wraps. Wraps are wonderful. And then there are the easiest and most, most used, and those are kind of like your backpacks, right? They look like backpacks that you put on. They've got straps. You can adjust them down and you can carry your child either on your back or on your front. Those are by far the most popular. And those are very versatile because you can put them on your back, you can put them on your front, that kind of thing. And so those are very common. And the great thing about a fanny pack is you can put a fanny pack on you with any one of those options, right? If you have your kid on your front, you can just move your fanny pack a little bit over to the side and nobody is going to look at you and be like, huh? Because you already got a kid strapped to you. Like any extra stuff that you have at you, people are just going to assume goes with the kid. And that's what makes that kind of stuff so easy to get away with. And in fact, I kind of wish I did it more when I was baby wearing all the time, because fanny packs are fantastic for that. But like you said, they're on the spectrum of off-body carry, or could be, because it's so easy to just be like, oh, I'm just going to unsnap this. And then, because that's the other great thing about them is you can take your kid off and they can go to the park and they can play, and you can take the carrier off and you just snap the gun back on. So they have such universal potential to be used and such ease of being incorporated into the system, but you have to be committed to keeping it on body even when you take your kid off.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Yes, that makes total sense. Again, I've never walked around with a kid before, but I've had to think about it as like someone who goes out in public and is wearing like a cute outfit, but has like an athletic looking fanny pack. I've had to think about that kind of like sore thumb look. It's super easy when I'm hiking because it's a fanny pack. You're almost expected to have a fanny pack. You're weird if you don't have a fanny pack. Not really, but I do appreciate this insight because this is, again, very new to me. And I also like that you're giving people in this podcast and through your class, from what I've heard, permission to look into options. I know for a while there, I kind of would just regurgitate information because it was safe. So like, a good example is like people who stand by the Filster Enigma and just nothing else. They don't consider anything else. If you consider anything else, you're stupid. Even if it's a holster made by Henry Holsters with discrete carry concept clips on a good belt, it's like, it's still not the Filster Enigma. And you're like, okay, all right, you need to chill. Like same dude, same manufacturer, depending on the gun. But anyway,
yeah.
I love that you are like, you're willing to talk about it and validate people who have thought about this, because I completely agree with you. There shouldn't be any, just don't carry, just don't even go there. And I know there's a lot of it out there. So glad that you're out here as this force to oppose that and to educate. Man, as far as carrying methods, something I want to make sure we cover before we even end this section. And of course, if you think of anything, please feel free to just go on a lovely tangent. When it comes to storage at home, are there any things that you recommend over other options? It's a weird way to ask that, but you know what I mean.
No, that was perfect.
Okay.
I just want to make sure that you were done with your sentence before I interrupted you. No, I'm a big believer. So disclaimer, for whatever reason, my hands, no safe can read my biometrics. I promise you I have fingerprints, but for whatever reason, like I'm that person, when I was actually trying to join the military and they were trying to take my fingerprints, it took them like 7 times to get my fingerprints. Like for whatever reason, my fingerprints just are like, so some people might not have this problem. That's why I'm a really big, advocate for RFID, quick access safes, because you can put that RFID chip in anything. You can put it in a ring. You can put it in a bracelet. I actually had it's not on this one, but I had it on the back of my phone at one point in time. So I could just like wave my phone over top of it. But then I have got a Bluetooth option and stuff like that. So RFID, we've got like 3 different RFID safes around. So that's my preferred for quick access, getting hands on it so that you're using it very quickly, like a, self-defense option or home defense option. Short of that, I think that and of course, obviously this is also, lifestyle dependent as well. Like I'm not going to tell anybody that the only way that they can be safe is to go out and buy a $3,000 safe, because I don't know your situation. You might never be able to afford that. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have the option of personal protection. And this is where Claude Warner, if you don't know about him, by all means, go look him up. He has done some amazing research on low-cost ways to train, low-cost ways to secure your firearms. And the one thing that he came up with that I absolutely agree with, you can go to a hardware store, get a metal just toolbox for less than $20 and a regular padlock for less than $5. And for less than $25, there you go. You have got a lockbox that you have a key to and nobody else has a key to, and you have secured your firearm. So don't think that this is like a, inaccessible to everybody. It's not. It is accessible to everyone, securing your firearms. Those little car safes that you were talking about, one, I think that if you carry a gun, you should have a car safe, because at one point in time or another, you're going to be in a position where you are required to store your firearm in a car. Now, that being said, it should be temporary. A car is not a holster. You should not be leaving your gun in your car. I'm a big believer that a gun should never spend the night in a car unless you are in the car as well. So that's something that, but those little lock boxes that you can get with the cable that connects to the car, those are like $20. And even that connected to your bed frame is better than a gun in a drawer. Now, is there a barrier to you accessing it in the moment that you need it? Yes, which is why I like the quick access safes. But the quick access safes are going to cost you a little bit more money. And if you can feasibly do that, then you should. Thankfully, they are pretty affordable these days. You can get a decent RFID safe for, I think, like $100 or so. But that could be limiting for some people, in which case, go out and get yourself a really nice lockbox or a toolbox and a what do they call those things? I just had a mind fart. Padlock. There we go.
Padlock. I was muted, but yes. Oh my gosh.
Yes. And and here's the thing: if you need your gun to be on you, or you need your gun to be quick access, put it in the quality holster that you're buying to carry with, and carry it at home. That's the safest place, legitimately the safest place for your gun around your child is in a secure holster on your body, provided, of course, you are conscious, sober, all those things. So I'm going to say that as a caveat, like, yes, you are a responsible, conscious, and sober adult who is going to take that responsibility. Then the safest place for that firearm to be is in your possession.
I appreciate you clarifying there. Yes, absolutely. That's actually been a question I commonly get in DMs. Like, do you drink when you go to the bars? Which is actually a fair question. I don't always drink when I go to bars. Question. But do you carry when you're at a bar? And my like blanket statement is no. Like I'm either going to carry and not drink and be out with my friends and be their like designated safety person, or I'm not going to drink and have a gun on me. That's like the safest answer I give people. I've heard some other iterations of that, but if you have anything else you want to add to that, feel free to, just because we have talked about that a little bit.
We have. And I think this is another one. There are some places that have legitimate laws on it. So be conscientious of that. There are some places that, it's in the paperwork. It is in the agreement that you make to get your permit to carry or whatever, that no alcohol shall be consumed while you're carrying. And if that is the stipulation of your permit system, whatever, then that's on your own discretion and your own risk as to whether or not you're going to break that. Now, there are other states where they basically treat it like driving a car, right? Like it's not a problem unless it's over the legal limit. And I would suggest, and this is kind of my own personal take on it, right? Like if you're a responsible adult, we all make those decisions and you choose to consume alcohol, because there are some people who are like, nope, I'm a sober individual and I will never touch alcohol. If that's your prerogative, then obviously you don't have to worry about it. But there are all sorts of people who, as part of being a responsible adult, understand these are my limits, right? Like I can have a beer and I'm fine. And I'm not, but there are other people who have a beer and they are going to, become a rage monster, or they are going to become, something else that, and I think that takes intellectual honesty. One, you need to understand what alcohol does to you, and you need to be honest about that. And you need to be honest about what are the likelihoods that you're going to do something stupid.
Absolutely.
And that could be whether you have alcohol or not. There are some people who just have tempers, right? Who need to be aware of that and need to be like, hey, if I put myself in a position where I'm angry, and be responsible with your choices. And now me personally, when I first started out carrying a gun, I had a very hard, I don't drink and carry rule. If I was in a position where that was going to change, I usually talked about it with my husband, because he was usually the one who was out with me. And we would decide, okay, who's going to drink and who's going to be sober. And if he was the one who was going to be sober, then I would just take my gun off and give it to him. And then he would take possession of it. As we got older and, and at that time when the state we lived in, it was very, you could not carry and, consume any alcohol. So we were also trying to abide by the law. As we moved, it became less of a problem. And, we'd sit there, I'd have a beer and I'd be like, ooh, I'd have that guilty feeling, right? Like I had a beer, but I'm like, but I feel sober and I feel fine. Like, I feel like I could make good decisions here. And, and then later on, maybe we'd leave and I'd be like, oh, I think that would have been okay. And you start to kind of have that evaluation of like, what would be okay, what would not be okay. And so there would be some people who'd be like, nope, absolutely not. I think that's negligent. I think that's wrong. And I would not disagree with them. I would not say like, you're being too whatever, because I don't know their situation. I don't know how they feel. I know my situation. I know how I feel. I know my own limits. Now, everybody who's ever said, I know my own limits, a lot of times that's the cry of people who maybe don't know their own limits. And I think that's really where it comes down to intellectual honesty and being willing to be like, maybe you give yourself just a hard limit, right? Like I will only allow, I will only allow myself one glass of wine. But if it's tequila, no, because I know, like you were saying, like I'm a lightweight, right? Like I can't have any amount of alcohol. And that for you might be different than like Chris Seipert, who's 260 pounds. And I've seen that man, put back 4 shots and still be stone cold sober and wonder what in the world happened, right? He might be different than me or you or anybody who can take different tolerances or different substances. And who am I to tell them that I know better than them and their own body, provided that they are being honest about it? And abiding by the law, of course.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, I appreciate you speaking on that because that's something that, first of all, I've always been like, this is not like an area of expertise. A general rule is if I drink, I don't carry. And that's like my safe way of giving people on the internet advice that I don't know. And like, I don't know, it's a clean answer. It felt
and
clean.
that would be my default answer, just like the same thing, right? Like if someone's going to ask me default, like I just have to default to one position.
Yeah.
My one position would be like, if you're going to drink, don't carry.
Right. Totally fair. Yes. So seriously, thank you. Because I wasn't even planning on going there today. Just with the what you've explained today, I thought it would be worth it to kind of, especially if someone's listening and they're like, oh, what is her policy on that? Given there's not a child around, kind of thing. So
yeah.
So thank you for that. Okay. I know I said that the off-body thing was the last thing, but something from our previous conversation, or our conversation at the dinner table, actually, you do not have to, share anything personal about this. It's whatever you're comfortable with. Something I've spoken to my oldest sister about. She is an instructor for the deaf and hard of hearing. And with that, she has been involved with children that are part of and this is a part where I get nervous because I don't want to say the wrong kind of like classifying word. But special needs is something I know she's mentioned. So I know those terms also just kind of adjust as years go by. So please correct me if I'm wrong, with that term and everything else. But, when it comes to having conversations with children with special needs, or, with parents that are having to balance that maybe in a mixed household, with children that are maybe neurotypical. Again, the terms are new to me. One, is that something you're even comfortable speaking on? And two, like, how does that change the household dynamic?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit about that. I've got one child who's special needs. My oldest he's on the spectrum, the autism spectrum, and he also has ADHD. So, and combined, they're a little nasty little combination. But luckily for him, he's very high functioning. So even though he's technically on the spectrum and he does have special needs, we've been very fortunate that it's not inhibited his abilities too much. And so having conversations with him about these things, he's able to comprehend them. Where he falls down most is with his emotional understanding. And that's something that we do need to be very, very conscientious of. He has very strong emotions. He's not able to understand, he's not very adept at taking the emotional pulse of like a conversation. So he's much more inclined to think very negatively about any kind of interaction. You could be sitting there and be complimenting him and telling him how wonderful he's doing and what a great person he is. And he's hearing in his head and he's interpreting it in his head, I'm terrible. This is bad. This person is mad at me. This person, because even if you're smiling at him, he interprets most facial expression as negative. And that's something that he's been in therapy for, and we're continuing to work on him with, so that he realizes the whole world does not hate him. But because of that, because that's the lens through which he sees everything, he's very reactive at times, and he can have a very explosive temper, and he can have, so, all of those things, like, we need to be looking at him and being like, hey, this young man is not in control of, and he's not able just yet to understand that not everything is attack against him, that he needs to have better strategies for understanding what's really going on in a situation before he chooses to respond, because a lot of times he interprets things very negatively, he responds very negatively, and people are genuinely confused as to why he's so angry about the situation. And it takes a bit of understanding and conversation for him to realize, like, oh, I made a mistake. Like, that's really not what was going on here. And that's just our situation. As anybody who's got a special needs child, or any kind of neurodivergence, or even a developmental disability, your particular situation is always going to be unique. Even if the broad strokes, even if someone can say, like, generally this is what happens when this person has this, whatever it is, there's always going to be unique aspects to you, your situation, your family situation. And those are always going to have to be assessed on an individual basis. And the thing that I think is so important for parents and who have firearms and are wondering how they fit in with everything in their family dynamic is, one, if you have a really solid foundation on general safety, carry safety, all of the, your training, what you're intending to use a firearm for, how you're intending to store it, all those things. If your foundation on those things is as rock solid as it possibly can be, you're much more able to figure out how to adapt and pay attention to the other things and how they might work into this really solid foundation. Where people get it wrong, and this is often where I see the issue, is they have, and this is just for a regular child or a special needs child, they have this child, and then they decide to get a gun. And that's where they're like, oh, I now have this child and I want to protect this child. And for the first time in my life, I'm thinking about these things I never thought about. I want to get a gun. So they're trying to figure out the parenting side of things. They're trying to figure out, and then maybe they do find out that their child has special needs. Now they're also trying to figure out how to get the correct therapies and the correct support and work with that disability or that special need. And then they also decide that they want to get a gun. And they're trying to figure this out while they're also trying to figure out all of this. And there's bound to be some conflict there. And that's not to say, and I want to be really careful here, because I don't want to say that just because you had a child and now you decide to get a gun, you shouldn't do it. That's not what I'm saying at all. But what I'm saying is you have an additional responsibility to put as much effort and care and conscious thought into making sure that you're doing all the things correctly with that firearm, storing it, training with it, learning how to handle it, learning how to maintain it, learning how to carry it, all of those things. You have that additional responsibility because literally your family's life depends upon it. And I don't think that there is a more tragic thing that can ever happen than the thing that you purchase to bring into your home for the safety of your family becomes the thing that is the tool used in the tragedy that ends up hurting your family. There is no greater tragedy in my mind. And unfortunately, that happens all too often because people think that they can just buy a gun and it will introduce safety, and they don't put the time and the effort and the responsibility in to making sure that they have all that they need to make sure that that is safely stored, carried, and maintained and handled, while also trying to figure that out. I was very fortunate in that I had a really rock solid foundation through being an instructor already and going through years of training and carrying before I ever had kids. And I recognized that that's kind of a privilege. That was a privileged position that I was in before I had kids. And had I had to do it opposite, I'm really glad that I didn't have to do it the other way around. But I will say to parents who are kind of in that position, I understand where they're at. And that's why I'm so passionate about providing the information that can help fill that gap as fast as possible so that you feel like you have that rock solid foundation and you're not in a position where you're like, I don't know what to do. I got this kid and I've got this gun. How do I make this work together?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm excited to share this with my sister. She's talked to me a lot about how she's asked me questions about how that conversation could be started in the industry and how she sees so many deficits just day to day. I mean, she's been at a DMV where people were yelling at a hard of hearing individual, and she had to go up and be like, in my very older sister passion, I feel so bad for this person that she yelled at because I know it wasn't nice. And she's just always been such an advocate. So I thank you so much, especially speaking from personal experience, just giving someone a place to start and validating that experience, and that it is a lot at once. It's overwhelming. So thank you so much. I hope that's brought peace to some people. And if anything has given someone else something to think about, if they're not, subjected to that world, kind of like me. So So thank you so much. Well, Melody, thank you so much for being on today. This has been incredibly insightful for me, and I cannot wait to be able to just tell people, go to this episode when they ask me questions about parenthood and caring. And, especially because I can only answer about one of those things and not even to its fullest. So I'm really, really excited that you came on. So thank you. Before we end the episode, is there anything you would like to leave the listeners with?
I guess I just want to kind of reiterate that the most important thing that you as a parent can give your child is your time and your attention and your love, of course. And if you're spending all of that time obsessing over the concealment of your gun or whatever it is, you're shortchanging your children, your experience. And I don't think there would be any other greater, I said, I don't think that there's a bigger tragedy than having this thing that you had that suddenly becomes a part of tragedy. I think a secondary tragedy to that would be you spent so much time and energy worried about protecting your family and how you were going to protect your family that you forgot to be part of your family. And I've seen that happen. I have genuinely seen families get split apart because dad didn't want to go to a park or to a place where he couldn't carry a gun because he felt like he was protecting, it was his responsibility to protect his family. And it caused strife between him and his wife. And then all of a sudden, his kids aren't going to care whether or not he could carry at the pool. What they're going to care about is whether or not dad ever got in the pool with them. And there are going to be times throughout this that you're going to have to make a decision between, do I carry a gun or do I spend this time wholly present with my children? And I hope that every single time, if you are able, you choose to be wholly present with your children, because that's going to make the biggest difference.
That was beautifully said. Thank you. Thank you for explaining that. I feel like I almost need to preemptively hear that. I know I'm going to be a paranoid parent. Even with my nieces the other day, my sister-in-law asked me to take them. Well, she asked me to pick something up from Walmart, and one of them was like, "Can I go with you?" And, they wanted to go in my 4Runner, and I was like, yes. And then the second they got in my car, I was like, everybody's a threat. And walking through Walmart, I was like, everybody wants to take her. I was so paranoid. It was anxiety provoking. So it gave me this little, glimpse into what that feeling could be like. So I feel like that's, oh my gosh, just the best piece of advice you could leave anyone with. So thank you so much, Melody.
Well, and thank you. I really appreciate you having me on here. This was fantastic. And I hope we do it again.
Yes. Oh, 100%. If you'll have me. Absolutely. And if you're listening and you would like to see the full version of this, I always forget to say this at the beginning. I'm going to make a note after this episode, but this full version will be on YouTube. So go check that out if you would like to see us drink our waters every now and then while we're on mute. That's the best part. And if you are listening and you've yet to rate the podcast, again, that helps us so much. Just take a few seconds, guys. That will help us get our name out there. And if you are interested in seeing short form content, little highlights of the episode, Lisa Hamilton is the curator of all of those on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Livefire, and now Twitter. We're really expanding here, so you can head over to there. All of our usernames are the same, @SheShieldPod. Thank you to everyone that has become a Patreon. I'm trying to get more exclusive content out there, so stay on the lookout. All resources mentioned, including how to find Melody, will be listed in the show notes, which are the notes below the pod. And if you or anyone you know is a firearms owner experiencing a crisis, look into holdmyguns.org. They are an organization that will connect you with a local gun shop or FFL to store your firearm for you until you are ready to regain access of it. The link to access their website and to look for a local storage location partner is available in the show notes. Thank you for listening. In the meantime, stay safe and stay vigilant. Are you ready to step up your shooting game? Introducing Walkers Incorporated, the pioneers in ear protection for shooting, hunting, and commercial applications. For over 25 years, Walkers has been revolutionizing the industry, ensuring your hearing safety and enhancing your shooting experience. Anytime I'm on the range, indoor or outdoor, I use Walkers ear protection to have crystal clear communication with my fellow shooters. I currently use the Silencer 2.0s and the Razor Slims for my range adventures. Not only does Walkers protect your hearing, but they also protect you. Being able to communicate with others on the range is vital to personal safety. You shouldn't have to sacrifice your safety when the ultimate goal is for overall better self-protection. With Walkers, you'll experience unparalleled comfort, unmatched innovation, and the industry standard in shooting ear protection. Never settle for anything less when it comes to your safety and enjoyment on the range. You can save on Walker's ear protection and support the podcast by using code SHESHIELD. That's SHESHIELD at checkout.